Hey everyone, welcome to Unique Ways with Thomas Gerard, an audio podcast. I have a notable guest on today. She studies the interactions between humans and technology and how technology affects culture. She's an internationally recognized design advocate and speaker, and the author of four books, including Calm Technology and a kid's book about technology. She spent 2 years as a fellow at MIT's Center for Civic Media and Harvard's Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society and was a 2021 Mozilla Fellow. She's named one of Inc. magazine's 30 Under 30 and Fast Company's most influential women in technology. And she was named a National Geographic Emerging Explorer in 2012 and received the Claude Shannon Innovation Award from Bell Labs. Please join me in welcoming Amber Case. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Are you ready for 20 questions?
I am.
Great. Question one. Tell me a little bit more about yourself. What do you do?
I'm very interested in improving how we relate to technology. So, more recently, we've had more screens than ever before, and our experience of technology has gone from something that we touch with physical buttons to something that we look at a lot. And I think that there's a middle ground where the technology that is in our lives can be in our lives, but we aren't in its life. In a sense, it's calming the technology down. So when you turn off the lights at your house, does the air purifier have a bright blue light that illuminates the room? Or does the laundry machine have like a giant buzz or a sharp beep? All of these little things can be tuned to sound better and have a better experience so that they can be better roommates.
Great. And just a note for the audience, if you guys are interested in other big 2025 episodes, please check out our episode with Kareem Rashid. Question two, what's a key piece of knowledge that makes you different?
Um, I think it's probably how I grew up. I grew up with two parents who put television on the air in the late 80s. So they came home and they didn't want to watch television. So we watched one television show, which was Star Trek Next Generation. And we also watched a bunch of science fiction movies every once in a while. But mostly my experience of growing up was a bit isolated in that my parents were a bit hermit-like. So we stayed in the house, but it was all about this bookshelf. And so I read books from all different eras. And I thought that the book that I read about that was a book by Plato. I thought that it was from 1960 because it was translated in 1960. So I got very confused as to what was contemporary and what wasn't contemporary. But I was really interested in seeing the through line of what stays the same even though the outside world changes. And I would read the 1960 World Book Encyclopedia in the 80s, and I would read what changed and what didn't. So, University of Chicago was a lot larger, and today it's smaller. Or the entry for computer was a big deal for me because what it said was that the computer is the size of a gymnasium and it takes a lot of time to operate. And I would talk this over with my dad, who would have me help him in his lab. So he was making speaker technology and circuit boards. So when I was about 3 or 4, the minute I had hand-eye coordination strong enough, he would have me help him solder circuit boards and basically be his lab tech. Which I guess you might do in like the 1910s, if you're a cobbler's kid, you might be working on shoes from the age of 3 or 4 in the shop. So in a sense, it was a very old-fashioned childhood, but it was high tech at the same time. I remember my dad and I wanting Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi didn't really work entirely yet. It wasn't really available to people's houses, but we would drill through the walls of our house together and put up repeaters in different rooms that were actually connected by Ethernet cable. So I grew up thinking that that was a pretty normal childhood. Also, all of my parents' friends were from other countries, and so it was a very international childhood. We grew up in an immigrant neighborhood in Denver, Colorado. So that's probably what makes me very attuned to seeing whether a device fails or succeeds because I had to live alongside them and build them. And I got to see what stayed true for 100 years and what changed rapidly.
Nice. So question three, why this of all things? Why do you do what you do?
I guess I do what I do because there's no other way to do things for me. Um, I can take a break for a month or a week or change careers or move cities, but the default thoughts running through my head, no matter where I go in the world and no matter what I do, are always about, hey, that doorknob could be made a little bit better, or that light is really blinding and could be replaced with a different light, or this could be so much easier to use if this and this were to change. And so a lot of people started asking, how do we actually quantify that? And so I built the very first standard that measures how much attention it takes to use your technology. And it's an 81 point certification model. So it looks at your primary attention, your peripheral attention, the durability of the device or system, light, how it communicates to you through light, sound, and then material design. So a lot of technology right now is very smooth, but if you have some subtle texture, it can help you develop a better relationship with the technology.
Hmm.
And there's all sorts of different findings from neuroscience that I'm finding to, I guess, support more of the nuanced qualitative things that I've experienced and I felt true to when I was 4 or 5, climbing trees and helping my dad build technology. So I do what I do because I don't have a choice, and this has always been my side project in life. And when there was an opportunity to make it a full thing, I waited for people to write the book on calm technology, and no one did. I know that the late Mark Weiser wanted to write a book about it, but he died before he could work on it. And for me, it's just something that needs to be done, counter to the technology that says, "Look at me, I'm really shiny. I look really good in a movie." But when you live alongside it, it's just not very fun to experience. So there's a big difference between what tech looks like on a screen and how it feels to use. And I want to bring more of that back.
Great. Okay, some people struggle with number four, and the question is, what does your future look like?
I'm hoping that my future looks like my past in that I get to be surrounded by emerging technologies and that I can deeply influence how people build things. Already, I've been seeing with our pre-certification program, either me or one of my team members, who are all industrial designers, can look at something and say, ah, this is a problem, this won't pass certification, or this will be annoying to somebody. Um, and in a sense, we're trying to advocate for people that don't get to advocate for themselves anymore. I guess in the 20s and 30s, you might write a letter to the head of a company and say, hey, you need to change this and offer some suggestion. There's not a lot of time for people to do that anymore. And oftentimes people might say, I don't feel good around this product, but I don't know why. Whereas I can articulate that that light bulb has a color rendering index of 80 instead of 100. So the room and the colors feel muddy, and that dressing room light actually makes you look washed out. And so you're actually less likely to try the clothes because the colors aren't faithfully represented. So to change that to a 95 CRI bulb is going to more faithfully represent the colors in the room and give you a feeling more of an incandescent light, after all these things were replaced um, with LEDs. So it's all about breaking it down to say, here's the qualitative experience that makes somebody uncomfortable or annoyed or draws attention to the tech instead of it being a pass-through that dissolves with use. Like a good book, the page disappears and you're in the world. Or a good bike, you learn once and you never have to learn it again. Or a good pair of running shoes, if they fit well, they dissolve with use. You don't notice them. You focus on the task and not the tool. So all of those little things that get in the way from flow, we're able to identify and ideally before a product launches, edit those out, suggest alternatives, work with the design team so that when it comes out, there isn't a huge waste of money of making something that either people don't like or has an issue. So I'm hoping that there's more and more of that in my future and that I'm able to make something that's extremely long term for life. I do want to do this for the rest of my life, and I've modeled it off of either LEED certified or Energy Star or even the Good Housekeeping Seal of Approval, which has been around for more than 100 years. So these type of things can really change how people experience the world. But they're slow growing, like an iceberg can shape a valley. And I'm hoping to be slow and steady and very trustworthy in the industry.
Great. Five we say is unique to this show. The question is, let's talk about location. How does the notion of place play into what you do?
Place is extremely important to me. I have a place-based memory, so whenever I'm in a place, I remember those memories associated with the place. Also, how my brain stores memories when I dream is it associates them all with specific places. And so I'll get to visit alternate world places. There's an entire version of New York City in my brain that has nothing to do with New York City in the real world at all. But it's helpful to think about location because location, especially what's around you, from different scales, it has a complete effect on how you perceive the world, how you think, your mood, everything from the amount of light in the sky to where the windows are angled in your house or your apartment to the trees surrounding you or lack thereof, the ability to walk or having to drive everywhere, public transit or not. Location is so important that I've relocated myself to where I grew up in Denver, Colorado. I find the high altitude is easier for me to think, and it's also very easy to fly anywhere I go. We opened up a Calm Tech Institute in Kyoto, which is a city with at least 1,000 years of history. And to be in a place like that means that there's a through line where you can meet people with a 400-year history associated with that place and how they think about products and how they think about texture and how you think in a space like that is very different from a building that's been around as a skyrise for maybe 6 months. And I call those places non-places, where, as anthropologist Mark Auger said, you don't have any relation or identity or history. And I would call Kyoto, Japan, especially the streets that have ancient homes on them, a hyperplace in which there's so much identity and so much relation and so much history to the environment um, that it's just very important to see these places and to experience them because I feel like some people can feel very unsettled but not know why when they walk down a street and there's some condo that's been built without any regard for the local environment. It looks like a cruise ship has settled upon land and is just sitting there docking, that no one in that cruise ship can ever really experience what it's like to be part of that world. And that abstraction can make people really unsettled. So for me, place is everything. And I'm a huge fan of Jane Jacobs and the Life and Death of Great American Cities, and also the book about Robert Moses by Robert Caro, The Power Broker, which is all about the decimation of place by putting a bunch of freeways through the United States and throughout the world, and how that changed the shape of cities over time. And I even moved to Portland, Oregon for a while because a lot of those highway projects he proposed in the 70s didn't get built. And so the city was a bit stuck in the 90s because of that. But it was a really unique place to live because of that as well.
Mm, great. Six, you're starting from the beginning. What advice do you give your former younger self?
If I had to start from scratch, the advice I would give my former self would probably be nothing. I don't have any advice to give to my former self because I had a tape recorder when I was a kid and I was constantly trying to invent a time machine and time travel. And I thought I can send a message to my future self, or I can make my future self happy by doing things that are scary. So I would say keep doing the things that I was afraid of and be okay if there's 3 or 4 years in which I don't feel like I'm on track. Everything is a learning experience, but don't just run away from a thing or, just follow your gut. Everything's okay. So I guess the main thing is just I did okay. Like I did the really hard things and I knew by reading a lot of people's biographies you might have something like, David Bowie making an album that people might not like and having to do, I don't know, Tin Machine or something as an opener for people for years and years, knowing that it would eventually lead to what he did with his album with Black Star. It's mostly that you have to be okay for 3 years doing something that people don't like because they're not ready for it yet, but you still have to rehearse so that when that time comes, they're ready for it and you are too.
Mm.
And it's just dress rehearsal. So a lot of my life when I was a kid was writing these notes to my future self and writing notes to my past self, which said, hey, this is dress rehearsal. Just because the people in school are making fun of you for being weird or being a hermit or talking about tech when nobody cares about tech at that time, it doesn't mean that there won't be a future world in which people care about this. You're just early and it's fine. You just have to wait, keep yourself company, and be okay because eventually it will be the norm and it won't be any big deal at all and you'll find your people and you might just be offset by 10 or 15 years and that's fine. That's plenty of time. Just hold on. So it helped really with isolation and loneliness and a lot of bullying. And then I just hung out outside a lot because it's different outside. It's not about, if you're wearing specific shoes or, you say certain things in a certain way. Um, and that, I lost my way a couple times, which wasn't losing a way, it was just taking a rest, like being a human. So I don't, I think I would say it's all good. Like my former self is fine. Like I can just accept and relax and I'm at peace.
Great. So seven, what's a day in your life like?
Depends on the day. So one of 3 days is going to be I wake up in the morning and there's usually calls starting in different time zones. So it can go from like 8 a.m. my time zone to talk to Europe in the evening to talking to Japan in the morning at 7 or 8 p.m. my time. Ideally, a day doesn't have all of those calls all the way through from West Coast to East Coast to Europe to Japan. That's quite a lot. And a lot of those days, it's meeting with people who have a product that they've contacted the Calm Tech Institute about, talking about maybe doing a speech or a workshop for someone, doing a podcast like I am right now. Um, and then taking some time staring out the window, making food, thinking about what I'm going to do to either consolidate action or announce something and try to think through those things. Then there's often like little tiny pieces of work where it's like, hey, you need to update this form. It's just a little tedious bureaucracy, to be honest. I wake up in the morning with an alarm. I use the Mudita Harmony 2, which is an e-ink alarm clock that we certified, and it's this really nice sound. So I wake up to that, get out of bed, I make my own matcha tea because it's delicious. And sometimes, if there's time in the morning, I'll just bike to the nearest coffee shop and hang out there with a pen and paper. If it's an ideal day off, I'm at the coffee shop at 7 or 8 in the morning, just staring into space and writing stuff down and thinking, and then biking back. Um, or going outside for a really, really long time. Um, on another day, it might be a travel day, so it might be land somewhere, sleep, and then uh, do a dress rehearsal or a talk or something like that. But a lot of time is this in-between time where my mind is just working on looking at certain things, taking photos of certain things, planning for what's going to happen. And there's a lot of, I guess there's a lot of dopamine around thinking about, ooh, that would be fun to do, and writing it down for later. So I have a lot of notebooks starting when I was 4 years old, and they're very consistent. I've just tried to keep a daily journal. I use a software called Dabble.me, where every day I get an email that says, what did you do today? And I just write what I did. But in that email, I get sent either a random day for the past or a day 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, all the way back. And I have 15 years of information I've put in there.
Mm.
So I'm able to see something that's really special. Doesn't require any other technology than a random cron job sending me, some information over email. I'm able to see the consistency of what I thought about in the past, what I feared, what I cared about, what I was doing. You can put pictures in it. Um, and when I look back at the physical notebooks, it's very consistent. I've cared about the same things over time, and I've tried to get that through line so that if I'm scared or anxious of doing something new, or afraid on an airplane or whatever, I can go back and say, hey, remember that time you felt like this? The outcome was X. So it's kind of a feedback loop to help me trust myself when the things that I'm doing are unprecedented, which sounds a little silly to say, but the things I'm doing are not entirely um, worked on right now, and they're a little niche. And I'm kind of making sure that they stay niche because I've noticed, especially in this era, once something gets big, it's hard to take it back and then it can go out. And I want this to be something that's evergreen. So I have to promote it enough that it moves forward, but not enough that it reaches the tipping point and goes viral and then extinguishes itself under its own weight. So all of this balancing act is something that I have to really be aware of. And those are the thoughts that are on my mind as I have my my days, I suppose.
Great. So eight, lifelong learning is a popular topic. How do you stay up to date?
So lifelong learning is really important for me because that's how I stay happy. I think of myself as a persistent kid that I was standing under a tree at 4 years old and I thought, this is me. And my consciousness very much came online and I've been the same person ever since. And it's the same type of character and flavor, which sounds curious, but I have decent amount of memories before then, but that was when I really was like, okay, I'm gonna create this life that I'm going to live and learn from people. So for me, there's three ways that I like to lifelong learn. First, I read a lot of biographies, especially in fields that are uninteresting to me and interesting. So when I was 14, I read a lot of mathematical biographies and science biographies, and it was incredible. And it's more like it's not that you have to be inherently good at math to read them, but you eventually get really good at reading the thing. And these people become like memories in your mind that you can interact with. And for me, where I didn't have a lot of friends, I got the biographies, and it was so fun to be able to understand different characters from different demographics, from the world. And I would often do a study of an individual character where I would read everything written about them ever made that I could find. So, like Paul Erdős, who was a prolific mathematician, I read a bunch of biographies about him. I tried to get primary works. I just wanted to see the different perspectives someone could have, knowing that it's not going to be perfect. You're never going to get the whole thing. But it's really fun because now I can say, what would Paul Erdős think about that? And know that I'm not going to get it perfectly right, but it's so much fun. Um, Another thing I do is when I notice myself being very attracted to something or jealous of something, I will take it upon myself to learn it. So for instance, photography, I remember reading Vogue magazine, I think I was like 10, and there's a big shoot in the middle made by this person named Annie Leibovitz, who's a very important photographer. And I said, oh, I want to do that. And I said, well, I'm going to figure out what it's like. What does it feel like to be on set? So when I had the time later, I kind of bookmarked it for a period in the future. I waited for a specific model of a mirrorless camera to come out that would work in darker light settings, so I wouldn't have to have as much equipment. And I said I'm going to allow myself to be absolutely terrible at photography because I know nothing about it, and I'll have to deal with that. And a bunch of people saying, "Why are you doing photography? That's not your core skill." For about 2 years to just be terrible and then to get pretty good around year three, that I just have to be bad. When a kid starts something, you don't yell at them and say, "Wow, you're not perfect," immediately. It takes a really long time to learn how to write or read, or drive or paint. And these are things that are they are unaccomplishable. You can do that for the rest of your life and pass it down, but it's never going to be perfect. So that's something that I do. I take something that I'm really bad at, that I'm not naturally suited to doing, and try to get good at it. And then I set a record, like, okay, I'll say that I'm good at it once, a large brand reaches out to me for studio photography of their brand, or if a designer says, I want you to photograph my entire clothing catalog. So by year 3, if I suck enough, as quickly as possible, by year 3, I'll probably get that, and then I'll have this skill that I can use for the rest of my life, and it will calm me down. So that's what I did with photography. And yeah, by year 3, I was renting studios and doing fashion photography and everything. I have under a different personality, of course. But it was really, really helpful because oftentimes I feel like people can get really comfortable and think they're good at, but by deliberately doing something I was bad at, it was really awful. Like, so that's part of learning. And then, the third part of learning is just metacognitive, watching how I think. And if the thoughts get negative or defeatist, just making sure that I'm eating enough food to produce an effect, which usually takes 1 or 2 days if I have a good night of sleep and some good food to feel really good. And in that moment when I feel really good, to make sure that I know that it's because of something I did a couple days ago. So to move forward, and yeah, and then a lot of it's just actually relaxing and doing nothing when I'm off duty, I suppose, to enjoy time with others and actually see them and listen to them.
Great. So 9 is about tools. Can you talk about your use of digital versus analog tools?
Yeah, so my favorite tool is that little app called Dabble.me. I think it's incredible feedback loop. For a camera, I use a Sony A7 III camera, which is super fun. Um, I like I guess I'm in the middle between a Mac and a PC. I use them both, but on the go, if I want to relax, I'm going to bring a Moleskine notebook, medium sized, or the remarkable that the latest one is this really small one that's useful for taking notes, but it's e-ink. So I've been gravitating a lot more towards e-ink devices because they aren't taking my attention. If I'm drawing a diagram or a schematic or doing something in design, it's easier for me to draw it with e-ink because I can change the dimensions and move stuff around, so I make like a really good situation. Versus if I don't have a bunch of pieces of paper and a huge desk, I'm not able to reference what I drew before and go through enough drafts to get to the shape that I want. I use that Mujita Harmony 2 alarm clock. I use this thing called a time timer. It's a lot of stuff that I've used for years that I've been certifying. Time timer is a visual timer. Um, you just turn it and it makes a big, solid, colorful shape to tell you how much time there is left. I love that. I think it's amazing. I really like in terms of technology, um, high quality light bulbs. I often use incandescent, but if I can't because of energy issues, I'll use this thing called waveform lighting, which offers a high color rendering index light. So they're trying to replicate the feeling of a cozy incandescent bulb with an LED. So I've been starting to make my own lamps just so I can experiment with colors and light. And then for sound, I have Bose 700 noise canceling headphones on the road and silicone earplugs or foam earplugs because things are loud. But I also have at home, I have two giant, I guess they're 14-inch QSC monitors with a Yamaha mixer because my first love is sound. My dad's hobby was building synthesizers and doing audio engineering, and my mom would play the piano, and I would sit under the piano when I was a kid and listen. And my dad would build speakers from scratch. So for me, sound comes first, then light, um, and uh, and materials are super important. So if I can get a good rug, I will get a good rug because it's really helpful for your mind to have that. I spend half of my time on the road and half of my time in Denver, Colorado, and I've been able to find a place that has a lot of beautiful windows at an affordable price, and I can see trees out the window, and there's a lot of light, and everything is good and okay. But there have been years where I lived in Portland, Oregon, and it was dark, and I kind of watched my thoughts fold in on themselves and turn dark. Um, and I had to be very careful about that because it's hard. It's a hard polarity to reverse when your mind does that. So when I'm on the road, it's either visiting companies, giving talks, or going to these what might be called institutional communities of people gathering around in a specific place to think about things. Um, those I consider vacations, just being able to marinate for a week in a bunch of random thoughts with people. It's kind of like being online, but it's in real life. And there's a lot of cooking and a lot of being outside and a lot of music making. And I think those are just really good for the soul, and something that we don't have as much in our local communities anymore.
Perfect. Halfway number 10, how do you deal with work life or life work balance?
I think two things on how I deal with work life and life work balance. I think that my work is my life and that I get such joy out of it, but it's also so scary. Um, and that's fine. But in terms of life, like I worked really hard because of my socioeconomic status growing up. I needed to work extra hard and I needed to work early. So I started working at 14. Um, I worked on websites for the mayor's office in Denver with this program for at-risk youth, low-income youth, where I was the at-risk low-income youth, where it was, let's make sure you don't go on the street. So I started that, which was great, and that taught me that I could make money by making websites, which I hadn't even considered. And then I worked in college as a printer tech, and then I did my first startup at 19 because I thought I should have some experience. So I just thought, in a sense, I might torch my 20s because I was an uncomfortable, depressed, anxious person anyway. And because things were so bad, I might as well just do something that's hard because if I do something that's easy or fun, it might not improve how I feel anyway. I'm just going to be have a difficult time. I think my mom said it took her until age 37 to just feel normal. And I said, well, if it's going to take that long, I might as well make good use of the time. And I think at the height of my depression, I said, I can't get any more depressed than this. This is a good time to write the book on calm tech because writing books is terrible. And if life is hard for me right now, I'll just have a better life in the future because I wrote this book. So I'm just going to go and do it. And I worked with an industrial designer who helped me edit, and he was incredible because, he'd come over and I had this little writing shed in the backyard and just work on it for a couple hours a day and got that thing done in a year and a half. And I interviewed a lot of people who had written books in the past, multiple books, in order to make sure I didn't have the pitfalls. So, um, I'm taking weekends now and having fun. But there is a sense just because of how I grew up, the idea that if I don't work, bad things could happen. I found the opposite to be true. I found that if I take breaks, it's during those breaks, going on a camping trip, taking a walk for a really long time, being in nature, where all the actual thoughts come from and where I realize that things aren't as important as I thought they were. And then I get more of the truth. So a lot of it is that. And when I was a kid, I spent a lot more time in the backyard. And so going back to that and climbing trees and rock climbing and things like that do help that come back to life.
Mhm. Great. 11, if you weren't doing what you do now, what might you be doing?
I was thinking of different life paths. Um, I suppose I did competitive speech and debate for a long time. I suppose if I wanted to be as detail oriented around tech, I would probably do tech law, specifically IP. Uh, that would probably be pretty fun for me, um, except I wasn't entirely drawn towards that. Another opportunity would have been beatboxing for a living. A friend of mine does that for a living, and it was really funny because he's actually an incredibly good user experience designer. But he doesn't get to do as much user experience design because he's a famous beatboxer and performer. So we always joke that we kind of got swapped in what we did. Um, if I had taken a different route, I think the only other thing I could probably do is be um, either a CMF, like a materials and finishes designer for industrial design firm, or like a taster. So I'm a super taster and super smeller, and I used to be a part of the OSU Taste Lab in Portland, Oregon, where I would come in and taste new things and rate them. But I would probably sign up either to be a sommelier, like a master sommelier, where you can taste all the different wine and pair it to whatever food, and you have employment for life if you get to that status, or being a part of like a food science lab where we're doing things like the very first lab grown salmon and tasting that against actual salmon. So I suppose that could be something. But all of it's, again, very technical, very specific, and that's what makes me really happy. Um, and I suppose maybe material science, if not that, but that's kind of related to the CMF, the colors and materials and finish.
Great. And what would you not like to do with your career?
I think what I would not like to do with my career is be so scared of doing this that I don't do it anymore.
Hmm.
I think it's needed. I think it's consumer advocacy in a sense, but maybe a little bit more exciting. So I don't want to give up, um, but I also want to be careful, and I would like to be delightful. I think the risk would be if I get too serious and it's not fun anymore for people to experience, that's a failure point. It needs to be fun and delightful and playful and bringing hope as well as being very good technical. So I definitely want to inspire the current and next generation of people to create high quality products that last for a long time and economically incentivize that through a certification award system. Yeah, I've got one thing that I'm doing, so I'm just going to do it.
Great. And do you have a favorite word, quote, or sentence?
Yeah, and I don't know who it's from, but it got into my head a long time ago. It was people overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what you can do in 5.
Hmm.
So to me, it was always about, all right, I can do anything in 5. So my goals are always going to be 5 to 7 years long. They're not going to be a year. And that, like a tree that looks like nothing in year 1 or 2 or 3, you don't plant a seed in the ground and yell at it the next year. Why haven't you grown enough to build a house? You wait for quite a while to be able to work with that tree and all of the work that gets done beneath the soils in the roots. And so I'd rather build those roots up quietly, and find the people also, more underground that identify with it before I pop up, um, and make sure that I get planted in the right spot so that it's safe to grow and there's a bit of cover.
Great. And do you have a least favorite word, quote, or sentence?
Yeah. Two things. When someone says, "What do we think of this?" when they talk about like a tattoo or a handbag, or what are we thinking of? I don't know what that's about, but it's almost like people are asking what the community thinks versus it's like they're afraid to have their own opinion and they're looking to others for validation, especially online. I know that it's not intended to be that way, but it's definitely cringeworthy. And then when someone says you have too much free time on your hands, it's often people that are watching TV for like 6 hours a day or like scrolling on their phone. You have too much time on your hands, as in someone who does something like very tedious. So around those kinds of people, I can't really talk because it's not really a valid statement. Um, Time is time, and you can spend it doing something tedious like making a Muppet and being Jim Henson and delighting people for decades. And you might say, wow, that person had too much time on their hands. It's like, no, you don't go up to like a Picasso painting and be like, or Renoir, any of these and say, oh, they have too much time on their hands. The time that they spent is invisible because you're seeing the final product. When someone is watching a movie, they're seeing the final product. They don't see the 14 years that it took to pitch that. And so it's a weird thing I've seen people say where I'm like, who are you saying this? I'm very confused. Why you're saying this is like, how dare you spend time on something that's interesting to you? You're not getting paid for it or something. It's very odd. To me, it's a chilling effect that just like clears the room of any joy of doing something that's weird. Um, and I think it's also associated with like people need to be able to have hobbies and like just doing whatever because it's fun. You don't need to make an Etsy store out of the fact that you bake cool cookies with elaborate details. Just do it. So I'm hoping that, that goes away. But it used to annoy me a lot more, and now it's like, okay, well, I'm never gonna be able to make a cool thing with them. And that's okay because they're a different kind of person than me. And a lot of times I wish I could be like that, but I'm not. And so I'm going to work with what I have.
Great. You're choosing one word to describe yourself. What word do you choose?
Curious.
What keeps you up at night?
All of the things I talked about on a daily basis, just strategy, modeling, trying to model the current state of things in the universe in my head and try to extend it over time so that I can understand, like, a lot of times I'm trying on a different type of strategy to see where it would go or how I feel. So much of what I do is in my head, like before I go to sleep. So I try to go to sleep a little early so that I can have that weird simulation system in my head that I can enjoy or not enjoy working with.
Hmm. What's a dream you're chasing?
I guess the dream is just the dream obviously is to make the world a better place, but it's really about clarity. If I can be clear, and I don't feel like I'm very clear right now, even close to what I would want to be, so people can see what I say and what I'm trying to do and say, ah, and then it just dissolves into the fabric of how we make good technology, I would be very delighted. That would make me really, really happy.
What inspires you?
People who are extremely clear. um, People who have lived interesting lives on their own terms. So Beatrix Potter is a really interesting example. She has a great biography that I think came out pretty recently about, okay, she drew all these animals. She could have been a successful biologist, but it was just not the right time era for that. But she also used a lot of her money to buy up land and raise old types of cows and sheep, I think sheep actually. And she lived, well into her later years as this kind of rugged, epic person, and had a really interesting life. And to me, that must have been hard, but she left behind a really cool legacy that allows people to really enjoy her work without even knowing the later stuff that she did. So it's just, to me, it's really fun to see. I'm waiting because there's a motorcycle outside. I think it's really fun to see how people are. The whole life, not just the parts that made them famous. So yeah.
Great. And 19, any advice you'd like to share?
Um, yeah. If you're kind of weird, it's okay to lean into the weird and think that trends, like eras of time, all pass. And if you keep finding something to come back to, find out what's hard about it, what part is difficult, and do the hard thing to figure out how to make it better. I think a lot of people have some ideas and they get it stuck in their head and then they get really weird about it, like they get covetous of the ideas because they thought about it forever and like ideas don't have it's not about like patenting your idea. Like I remember going through the airport when I was a kid in Minneapolis and I took like a spiral shoelace and I attached it to a Beanie Baby and I bounced up and down while I was walking through the airport and some toy executive saw it and I watched him looking at it and then on the market 6 months later there was the same thing. And I was like, that's interesting, you know, because in a sense he got the idea from that experience. I'm not going to build that. I'm a kid. Um, there's no taking the idea. There's a lot that goes into implementing something. So I really like to think where somebody says, oh, I'm so mad that person stole my idea. It's like, well, did you have the implementation to do it? I also think of Newton and Leibniz, who came up with calculus at the same time. It was just an idea whose time has come. So I think it's more about implementation and getting better at completing things than having something perfect in your head that you get really annoyed about. If you can't implement it, you can keep trying, but it shouldn't be your whole life. Like, it should always be, in my opinion, a side project until you can show that it's sustainable enough to bring into the world. And while you're doing something that's scary, that makes you insecure in yourself, you should always be kind to people, especially the people in your life, and support them because they will support you. Don't push people away. Understand how you act.
Great. And finally, number 20, how can our listeners keep tabs on you and what's our call to action?
Sure. My call to action is look at all the mundane stuff in your life that you don't notice because it's so well designed it's invisible. And by that I mean shoes, a desk, a table, light switch, a glass of water. Um, Try to train yourself to understand the design choices that have been around a long time that you still rely on, even if you don't get advertised it. So, like electricity. And then if you want to follow me online, I like to inhabit boring places because I find it fun. So LinkedIn is a great place to follow me. You can follow me on Instagram at Case Organic. You can follow me on the Calm Tech Institute blog, so calmtech.institute, CALMTECH.institute. And there's a blog there where I post a lot of articles, blog posts like Your Hands Have Eyes Too, and how to make surfaces that are delightful to touch and also allow you to scroll through screens really fast. You can also email me, case@calmtech.institute, if you have interesting ideas about stuff that should be certified or you're a startup that has something that promotes mental delight while also being more of a pass-through product. Especially looking for the category next in kids tech. You are a parent and you have something that your kids love to use that's not an iPhone, please let me know because I would love to certify it.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much for joining today. It's a real honor to have you on today.
Thanks for the call. Appreciate it.